The furnace kicked on at 6:17 in the morning, and I remember thinking that was the loudest thing in the house. Not my wife's voice, not my stepson's, just that old furnace doing what it was supposed to do. I was 63 years old, standing in my own kitchen in Boise, Idaho, still wearing the flannel shirt I'd fallen asleep in the night before, reading a note that had been left on the counter next to the coffee maker. Folded once, my name written on the outside in my wife's handwriting. The same handwriting I'd watched sign our marriage certificate 11 years ago. I didn't open it right away. I poured coffee first. I don't know why. Maybe I already knew. Maybe some part of me had known for a long time that a morning like this was coming, and I just wanted one more minute before it arrived. I opened it while the mug was still warming my hands. Leonard, we've gone to Scottsdale for the week. Philip needs a change of scenery before his interview. We'll be back Sunday. Please have your things moved to the guest room before we get back. Vivian and I talked, and we all think it's better this way. Though think it's difficult. I read it 3 times, then I set it down, drank my coffee, and listened to the furnace. I should back up, because if I just tell you about the note, you'll think I'm a man who was blindsided. And in some ways I was. But in other ways, the honest ways, I'd been watching this happen for years, one small thing at a time. The way a house settles. You don't notice each creak. You only notice when the floor finally gives. My name is Leonard. I'm 63. I retired 2 years ago from 31 years as a civil engineer for the county. I have a son from my first marriage. He lives in Portland. Calls every Sunday. Good kid. My first wife passed when he was 12. Breast cancer. That was a long time ago now, but it doesn't feel like a long time ago. I met my wife, I'll call her Vivian because that's her name, at a church potluck of all places. I was 51. She was 44. She had a son, Philip, who was 15 at the time. His father had left when Philip was 9, moved to Phoenix, called maybe twice a year. I liked Vivian. I genuinely did. She laughed easily and she made good soup, and she remembered the names of people she'd only met once. We dated for 2 years before I proposed. I knew going in that Philip was part of the package. I wasn't naive about that. I'd been a father. I understood that being a stepfather to a teenager wouldn't be simple. What I didn't fully understand, what I kept making excuses not to understand, was that Vivian had decided, somewhere along the way, that loving Philip meant never asking anything of him. Ever. For anything. The house was mine. I want to be clear about that because it matters to the story. I'd bought it 12 years before I met Vivian. 3 bedrooms, a big backyard, a garage I'd converted into a workshop. I paid it off in 2019. When Vivian and Philip moved in after the wedding, I added her to the deed because I thought that was the right thing to do. I thought, that's what you did when you built a life with someone. Philip was 16 when they moved in. I tried. I really did try. I set up the spare bedroom for him. I took him to get his learner's permit. I showed up to his high school baseball games, even though he never once looked into the stands to find my face. I drove 40 minutes each way to pick him up from his friend's house at midnight when Vivian had already gone to sleep, and her phone was on silent. He never said thank you. Not once in 7 years did that boy look at me and say thank you. Vivian would say, he's just quiet. That's how he is. And I'd let it go. Because I loved her, and because I told myself it didn't matter. But it did matter. It matters. When you pour something into a vessel that has no bottom, it matters. Philip graduated high school by the skin of his teeth. He did 1 semester at Boise State, then stopped going. Said the classes weren't right for him. Vivian agreed immediately, said the school wasn't a good fit, said he needed time to figure himself out. She was not wrong that he needed time, But time became months, and months became 2 years, and he was still in my house, eating my food, running up my utilities, and contributing nothing. I brought it up once. Just once, early on. I said, "Do you think Philip might want to look for some kind of work? Even part-time, just to get some structure." Vivian looked at me like I'd suggested something cruel. "He's going through a hard time," she said. "I know," I said. "I just think having something to do might help." She didn't speak to me for 2 days. After that, I didn't bring it up again. I told myself it wasn't worth the fight. I told myself I was being patient. What I was actually being was a man who had decided that keeping the peace was more important than telling the truth, and I paid for that decision for years. Philip was 23 when things started to change, and the change didn't come from inside the house. It came from his father. His father, I'll call him Brent, had apparently gotten his life together down in Phoenix, remarried, started a small landscaping business, bought a house. He started calling more. Then he started visiting. The first time Brent came to Boise, he stayed in a hotel downtown, and Vivian and Philip went to dinner with him. I wasn't invited. That was fine. I understood. The second time, Brent stayed at my house. Vivian asked if that was okay. I said yes, because I didn't know how to say no in a way that wouldn't sound petty. I shook Brent's hand. I made breakfast in the morning. I was civil. I thought I was handling it well. What I didn't realize was that Brent had opinions about how Philip's life should go, and those opinions started filtering back to me through Vivian. Brent thought Philip should move to Phoenix. Brent thought there were better opportunities there. Brent thought, and here's the one that stays with me. Brent apparently told Philip that he should have more say in the house he lived in, that he shouldn't have to ask permission to have people over, or to use the garage, or to stay up late making noise in the kitchen. My garage. When Philip came to me one evening and said, "I've been thinking, and I'd like to use the workshop space on weekends," I said, "Sure, what are you working on?" He said he wasn't sure yet, he just thought it should be available to him. I said I'd think about it. He said Brent thought I was being territorial. I looked at my stepson, 23 years old, unemployed, living rent-free in a house I owned, and I thought about all the baseball games, all the midnight pickups, all the breakfasts I'd made and never been thanked for. I said very quietly, "The workshop is mine. I'll let you know." He walked away, and I heard him on the phone with his mother within 10 minutes. The pattern that developed after that is one I'm not proud to have allowed, but I allowed it. That's the truth. Brent started calling Vivian more. Then he started coming by without calling ahead, just stopping in when he was supposedly passing through, which happened to be whenever Philip texted him that I'd done something he didn't like. The three of them would sit in the living room, my living room, and I would hear the low murmur of conversation and occasionally my name, and I would go out to the garage and work on something with my hands and tell myself it was fine. It was not fine. I started keeping a small notebook in my truck. I'm not sure why I started. Maybe some instinct, maybe I'd read something somewhere, but I wrote things down. Dates. Incidents. The time Philip borrowed my truck without asking and brought it back with an empty tank. The time Vivian told me that Brent had suggested I was controlling because I'd asked Philip not to smoke on the back porch. The time I found a bill on the counter for Philip's car insurance. My name had been written in as the responsible party, with a note from Vivian saying she'd already told the agent it was fine. I didn't cancel it. I should have. Instead, I paid it and wrote the date and amount in my notebook. The notebook got heavier. The week before my birthday last April, Vivian mentioned that she'd been talking to Brent about Philip's future. "He has a real shot at this project management job in Phoenix," she said, "but he needs to do a certification course first, online, about $1,200. "Okay," I said. "Is he going to take it?" "Well, that's what I wanted to talk to you about." I looked at her. "Brent and I thought maybe you could contribute," she said. since you've been like a father to Philip." I sat with that for a moment. "Brent," I said, "and you, we just thought, does Philip want to do this course?" "Of course, then Philip can ask me himself." She looked at me like I was being difficult. That look. I had seen that look so many times by then that I had started to feel it before she even made it, like a change in barometric pressure before rain. Philip did not ask me himself. Vivian came back the next day and said she'd just go ahead and put it on the joint credit card. I said, "Please don't do that." She said I was punishing Philip for something that wasn't his fault. I said I wasn't punishing anyone. I just wanted to be asked directly by the person who wanted the thing. She put it on the card anyway. That night, I lay in the dark next to her and thought about the deed to my house. I thought about my name on the mortgage that didn't exist anymore, because I paid it off. I thought about the workshop and the truck and the 11 years of breakfasts. I didn't sleep much. My birthday was a Tuesday. I took myself out to lunch because Vivian had mentioned she and Philip were helping Brent with something that day. I didn't ask what. I had a burger and a beer at a place downtown I like, and I sat by the window and watched people walk by, and I thought, I am 63 years old and I am eating alone on my birthday. And I am paying for a certification course for a young man who has never once called me Dad. And I am not sure how this happened. I came home to an empty house, and on the kitchen counter, next to the coffee maker, I found the note. I read it 3 times as I said. Then I put it in my notebook. Then I called my son in Portland. He answered on the second ring. He could hear something in my voice because he asked, right away, "Dad, what happened?" I told him. All of it, not just the note. All of it. The 11 years of it, the things I'd never said out loud to anyone. He listened without interrupting, which is a quality he got from his mother, and which I have always been grateful for. When I finished, he said, "What do you want to do?" I said, "I want to talk to someone about the house." He said, "I'll find you a name." The attorney my son found was a woman named Ellen Marsh with an office on Federal Way. I met with her the next morning. I brought the notebook. She was direct and clear, and did not waste my time. She explained to me what I already suspected, that adding Vivian to the deed did not obligate me to anything I did not choose to be obligated to. That Idaho is not a community property state in the traditional sense, and that my options were more than I'd feared. She also pointed out gently that the certification charge on the joint card was worth documenting. I told her about the notebook. She said, "You've been keeping records." I said, "I didn't know why at the time. I think I knew." She said, "People usually do." I asked her what the process looked like. She told me. I listened carefully. Then I asked her what I needed to do first. She told me that too. Vivian and Philip came back from Scottsdale on a Sunday, late afternoon. I heard the car in the driveway. I was sitting at the kitchen table with a cup of coffee and the newspaper I hadn't read yet. She came in first. She had a Scottsdale tan, and she was smiling until she saw my face. She said, "Leonard." I said, "How was the trip?" It wasn't a question. She heard that. Philip came in behind her, carrying a duffel bag, already looking at his phone. He glanced up, saw me sitting there, looked back at his phone. "Can we talk?" Vivian said. "Sure," I said. "Sit down." She sat. Philip stayed standing near the door, like he wasn't sure if he was staying. I slid a folder across the table. She opened it. I watched her face change, not all at once, but the way a sky changes, gradually and then suddenly. She looked at the first page, then the second, then she looked up at me. "You filed," she said. "I filed," I said. "When?" "Thursday." She set the folder down. She looked at Philip. He had finally put his phone away. "There's a second document," I said. "Second tab. I've also removed myself as the responsible party on the car insurance." That took effect Friday. The silence in the room was different from the silence of any other argument we'd ever had. It had weight to it. 11 years of weight. You can't just... She started. The house is in my name, I said. It was in my name before we were married. I added you to the deed because I trusted you. My attorney has advised me on the next steps, and I'll be following her advice. You'll receive the paperwork through your attorney when you retain one. Philip said, this is because of the workshop. I looked at him. 26 years old. Standing in the house I'd owned since before he was old enough to shave. No, I said, this is not because of the workshop. I didn't explain further. I didn't need to. Some things you don't get to hand someone. They have to find their way to understanding on their own, or they don't, and either way it's no longer your problem. I moved to the guest room that night. Not because the note told me to. Because I chose to. There's a difference, and it mattered to me. My son drove down from Portland the following weekend. He helped me start moving things to a storage unit I'd rented on Overland Road. My tools from the workshop, my father's old rocking chair, the boxes of photos I'd always kept in the closet off the hallway. We worked mostly in silence. He didn't offer opinions about Vivian or Philip. He just carried things. At one point he held up a photo, me and him at a Boise Hawks game. Must have been 15 years ago, before I'd even met Vivian. He was maybe 20 in the picture. We were both squinting into the sun and laughing at something I can't remember. He put it in the box carefully and taped the box shut. I watched him do it and thought, this is what family actually looks like. Not the big gestures, not the paperwork or the arguments or the notes on the counter, just someone driving 4 hours to help you carry boxes, without you having to ask twice. The certification course, as far as I know, did not get Philip the job in Phoenix. I heard this from a mutual friend of Vivian's months later, not from Vivian herself. Apparently, Brent's landscaping business hit some trouble and the job fell through. I don't say that with satisfaction. I say it because it's what happened. I'm renting a small place now over on the north end, near the Boise River Greenbelt. 2 bedrooms, which is more than I need, but the second bedroom has good light, and I set up a work table in there for small projects. I made a cutting board last month. I'm working on a jewelry box for my son's wife. I walk in the mornings. I sleep better than I have in years. A friend from my old county job asked me recently if I regretted the 11 years. Regretted putting in all that time and money for something that didn't hold. I thought about it for a while before I answered. I said, I regret some of the choices I made inside those years. I regret not speaking up sooner. I regret letting the small things slide because I told myself they weren't worth the fight, when what I really meant was that I was afraid of what the fight would cost me. That fear cost me more in the end than any fight would have. But the years themselves, no. I learned things in those years. About what I'm willing to accept. About the difference between patience and surrender. About how long a person can tell themselves a story before the story stops holding. I learned when to stop. That's not nothing. At 63, that's not nothing at all. The furnace in my new place is quieter than the old one. Some mornings I pour my coffee and stand in the kitchen, and there's just nothing. No murmur of someone else's conversation. No sound of a duffel bag being dropped on the floor. No note folded on the counter. Just me and the coffee, and whatever the day turns out to be. I found I could live with that. More than live with it. I found I could rest. I still have that note. It's in the same notebook where I recorded 11 years of things I told myself didn't matter. I look at it sometimes, not out of bitterness, but because I think it's important to be honest with yourself about how things actually went. Not the version you told your coworkers, not the version where you were endlessly patient and noble. The real version, where you made choices you knew were wrong in the moment and made them anyway because you wanted to believe the situation would eventually correct itself on its own. It doesn't. That's the thing I wish someone had told me plainly when I was 51 and falling for a woman with a teenage son and all that hope in my chest. Situations do not correct themselves. People do not change because you are kind to them. Kindness is not a negotiating strategy. It is not a currency you can spend to purchase different behavior from someone who has no interest in changing. I confused patience with wisdom for a long time. They are not the same thing. Patience without judgment is just waiting, and I waited a very long time. What I understand now, at 63, sitting in a rental house near the river with a cutting board I made myself drying on the counter, is that every outcome in my story followed directly from a decision I made or failed to make. When Philip first spoke to me with contempt and I said nothing, I taught him that contempt was acceptable. When Vivian put that certification charge on the joint card after I'd said no and I let it go, I taught her that my no had no real weight. I built the conditions of my own diminishment, slowly, over years, one accommodation at a time. That is a hard thing to sip with. But sitting with hard things honestly is the beginning of something better. The notebook mattered, not because it gave me ammunition, I didn't think of it that way, but because the act of writing things down forced me to see them clearly. There is something in the human mind that will rationalize almost anything if you let it stay blurry. The moment you name a thing precisely. She put the charge on the card after I said no, on this date, for this amount. It stops being a feeling and becomes a fact. Facts are harder to talk yourself out of. That clarity, built over months, is what allowed me to walk into Ellen Marsh's office with something solid in my hands, instead of just a bruised sense of having been wronged. I think about my son driving down from Portland with no complaints, loading boxes into a truck, holding up that old photo of us at a baseball game, and setting it carefully in a box. That is what I should have been measuring all along. Not whether Philip called me Dad, not whether Vivian appreciated what I contributed, but whether I was living in a way that I could respect when I looked back at it. Whether I was the kind of man who acts from his own values rather than from fear of conflict. I wasn't for a long time, and then, finally, I was. That change didn't come from a single dramatic moment. It came from the accumulation of everything I'd written down, everything I'd quietly observed, and one morning alone in a kitchen where the only sound was the furnace doing its job. Sometimes the clearest moments of your life arrive not with noise, but with silence. The kind that finally tells you the truth you've been too busy to hear. I found I could live with that truth. More than live with it. I found I could rest.